afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our 7th Let's Talk About webinar. I hope everyone had a lovely International Women's Day earlier this week and potentially joined us for our own celebration. I'm Siobhan Smith, Lead for Diversity and Inclusion at KTN and Women in Innovation Programme Manager, and it's my honour to introduce our host for today's webinar, Jenny Tooth. Jenny is CEO of the UK Business Angels Association, the trade body for angel and early stage investing, representing over 18,000 investors around the UK. Jenny has over 20 years' experience of facilitating SMEs access to investment, both in the UK and internationally. She ran her own consultancy on access to finance for SMEs, including spending 9 years based in Brussels, working closely with the EC. Jenny is an angel investor, and her role at UKBAA, she focuses on building the angel community around the UK, connecting investors to good deal flow and assisting entrepreneurs to attract investors. Jenny sits on the steering group for emerging technologies and innovations for Innovate UK and the advisory board for the London Co-Investment Fund. Jenny is an experienced speaker on angel investing and entrepreneurship, both in the UK and internationally. Jenny was also awarded an OBE in 2015 for services to small businesses. Jenny's expertise in investment makes her the perfect person to host today's conversation. And alongside our panelists, they will be discussing how to pitch to investors. So over to you, Jenny.
Well, thank you, Swan, for that very, very kind introduction, and absolutely delighted to be here today. And, you know, it's such an important topic, isn't it? So I'm really, really pleased to be joining you. I'm going to begin by introducing to you 3 fantastic women that I will be in conversation with today. And I'm sure you'll really enjoy their insights as we discuss all this today. So I'm going to first of all introduce you to Abby Morris, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Abby with us today. Abby is actually one of the Innovate UK in Women in Innovation award winners for 2021, and as someone myself, I'm one of the ambassadors for Women in Innovation and one of the judges. I didn't judge you, Abby, actually, but I'm so delighted to have you here. I mean, Abby's doing something really, really interesting, and to many of us, in that her company, Compare Ethics, that she co-founded, is a platform which connects conscious shoppers with brands which are ethical and sustainable, and very much focused on greenwashing, which I'm very, very interested in, Abby, as well. What's great as well is that Abby has been through the process of raising investment, and she'll be able to tell you more about that. She's invaded it from both angels and VCs. So a really great example. Also joined today by Emma Fadlan, who is from the KTN investment team. And I've met Emma before. She's a great supporter of investing for women. And also Emma has huge experience as a mentor, and really has her own very strong experience from health sector, cybersecurity, and has done a lot of work on investment readiness and pitch readiness. So she'll be the perfect person to give us the ins and outs of pitching today. And then finally, absolutely delighted to be joined by Nicole Velho, who is co-founder at Sci Ventures. And if you haven't come across that, that is the most fantastic new group that is really helping women founders to access investment, and it has some amazing investors they're working with. Nicole herself is an angel investor, and I'm delighted to say was one of our UKBA nominated Inspiring Women Investors for International Women's Day. Which is absolutely lovely to have you here. And got huge experience in finance background as well, but also a founding member of some very important new groups that are focusing on women founders, Mesa Investment Club, and also a member of Alma Angels and Backed VC as well, who many of you may have come across. So what a fantastic group of women to be joining me today. Welcome, welcome. I thought I'd really kick the conversation off because I have been around here in this space for a very long time, as you've gathered. And so I've seen so many pitches. And so I know how challenging this can be and how many various ways we need to think about this, and particularly as women founders. The whole thing about the pitch is it's really your chance to show what you can do. It's many investors may have looked at your deck already. They may have been through some documents. They may have looked you up online, but this is the real chance you have to really speak directly with the investors and to introduce yourself, your business, and your innovation. And so, these are very, very important times. It's also important to think about that it is a competitive landscape. There's a lot of pitching going on. There's a lot of people seeing pitches, and the angels and VCs alike can get quite jaded. So again, how you go about grabbing attention and attracting that investor is really, really important. And also how angels and VCs might look at this in different ways. I think it's also important to remember that it's not just about the content. It's not just about the slide deck. There are many other aspects to this that, we'd like to talk about today. And also bearing in mind that your pitch is actually the introduction to the next phase of the investment process. And you've got to get past that first hurdle. So how are you going to get to that next stage, and really what to expect as you start to think about, I've got past the pitch, now what next? So I thought we'd touch on all of those issues today. And I said, absolutely delighted to have my such a great group of people with me today. So I thought we'd kick off, ladies, if that's okay. And this is a conversation, by the way. So, we'll all be pitching in, but I'm really looking forward to your insights and your perspective. And I thought, Nicole, I'd really turn to you first, because I think, why is the pitch so important when you're seeking investment? And really, why can it often seem quite daunting as a woman entrepreneur when you kind of look at all the many people around you and all the pitches, as I've said, that have gone before you? What do you think are the particular things that women should be thinking about when approaching a pitch?
Yeah, so interesting question, because in my opinion, I think females, we're generally very good communicators and have, a great way of storytelling. However, in C, the mentorship platform that we built and the founders that we see coming through very often find it very difficult, and I can understand why. The main reason, I think, is because when you're a founder of your business, you're so close to all the details on a daily basis, and you're an absolute expert in your field. But to really choose what's going to appeal not to you as a founder and how you love your business, but to an investor, and pick out those specific points can be really, really challenging. So I think that's the one thing, is storytelling is something I see a lot of founders needing help with in this space. For females particularly, I would say another thing is focusing on how to reframe questions, because we all are very aware of the biases that are out there, and all of us, have our own biases, and the investors will have theirs. So when you get negative questions framed in a negative way, having the skills to kind of turn that around and answer it in a very positive way, saying this is what I've achieved rather than this is how I won't fail, because we all know that this can be a problem with some investors. And I think the balancing as well of this kind of storytelling with the metrics. So making sure that there are those really, really juicy metrics in there to grab the investor that makes them say, I want to have a follow-up call with you. There's something that stands out about this deck, because the amount of deal flow that a lot of us see is huge. And so we need something that just grabs us and makes us think later, I have to follow up with that founder, or I really hope they send me the email, which we'll get to later. And I think just getting really comfortable with selling ourselves. I mean, I have this problem myself. Honestly, I really struggle sometimes to just get out there and, toot my own horn in a way and say, this is what I'm amazing at. And I see a lot of male friends even doing it very, very comfortably. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the better founder in any way. In my experience, they're no way related, but it's part of the skills you need. If you can sell your business to an investor, you can sell it as well to customers, to stakeholders, to new hires and everybody. So I think as an investor, you need to see that somebody can turn that on if they need to as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that point about selling is really important, isn't it? I mean, it's very, it is, when you think about it, as an entrepreneur, the big thing you need to be able to do is sell. So to be able to sell yourself and sell your business, I mean, you're asking for shares in your business. You're asking people to want to get involved and take risks to come alongside you. So it is about selling. And that's why I think sometimes you shouldn't be so daunted, because it is about, just think of it. It's, it is about selling in the end. You're not making a speech to the Prime Minister or something. It's actually selling to, they are like your customers, they are looking for that. So I do think that's a really important point, and especially for women to focus on. I thought I'd just now bring Abby into the conversation, because Abby, you've just been recently through this process. And I just wondered, when you were thinking about it, and did you, how did you approach the pitch? Was it, well, I'm going to sell something, or did you think I must prepare in a particular way, knowing that it's very competitive? What was your approach to going forward and putting that pitch together?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I think the core thing for me that I wanted to do is really get advice. So that actually helps you shape that core proposition of what you actually want to go out and ask. And I spent actually quite a bit of time before even launching an investment round, working out what is that right investor fit for me, because like you say, there are so many investors and there is so much pitching going on. You could end up spending a lot of your time with, I suppose, the wrong investor fit, i.e. that they don't quite like your vertical, they don't really like your business model. But actually it takes, in the very, very early days, a lot of conversation, looking at your metrics, looking at where you're going in your business strategy to get advice from the right people. And I think I spent a lot of time doing that, and a lot of coffees before COVID, of just getting to grips with understanding those mechanics. And I think that really helped me then say, okay, I'm really clear and I'm really confident of this as a proposition to pitch the market, and that's really where we jumped out. And then in the end, we opened our round 2 weeks before lockdown and closed it 2 weeks into it. So, in the end, it was a very short round because we actually had done all of that homework beforehand.
Yeah, no, that was interesting. So you had so in the end, you did get it through during lockdown, although you'd been doing the prep. But I think your point is really important. Like, do that kind of research beforehand, and researching your investors. If you know who you're pitching to, obviously, that's incredibly important. Sometimes in a big audience with angels, of course, it's a big audience, and you actually don't know who's going to be out there. You've met one or two people at the front end, but that could be all kinds of a range of people ultimately. With VCs slightly different, and we'll go on to that in a sec. But I think that idea of kind of making sure you're well prepared, and I think that sounds really a very fundamental and useful piece of advice, and do your homework as well. Moving to you, Emma, on that one. I mean, obviously, Abby particularly mentioned that whole idea about be prepared and think about that. Do you think for women do you think there's more preparation as a woman, given that they know it's a very competitive landscape?
I think not just for women, but for anyone approaching investment. But I think women in particular, we want to be perfect, and we want to be really confident about the content. So for me, I think what's really critical is to have a really well evidenced value proposition. You really know your stuff. You really understand what it is that you're pitching, the content, that you understand what it is that you're asking for. So this is the need, these are my USPs, this is why I've got that clear position in that marketplace, whether it's around IP or first mover advantage, it doesn't matter. Just being able to really articulate and be really confident in the way you speak. And I think we've mentioned it, both Abby and Nicole have mentioned how important confidence is. And I think when you are always feeling that you might be on your back foot, you need to have prepared more on the content of what you're going to be sharing with people, and to really own it. And that includes numbers. And if you haven't got all of that detail, or you don't understand it, then make sure that you get that advice, that support from your peers or from advisors, so that you can actually answer those questions, so you don't feel flustered when you're in there. And ultimately, what are investors looking for? Well, they're looking for a team that can execute on the plan, but they want a really well articulated and validated value proposition. and they want to know that you understand your marketplace and how you fit in and what's unique and special about your technology. So if you really can own that when you're pitching and you feel confident, then I think you're going to go over the line very easily.
Oh, thanks very much. No, that's really, really helpful. And yes, I mean, that preparation and really being sure you know your numbers and your value proposition. I mean, Abby, back to you on that. When you were kind of thinking of your preparation, were you especially conscious that you might, as a woman, get more quizzed about your numbers? Because to be honest, I see that a lot, that women particularly get asked about the numbers, like, I bet you don't know your numbers. What do you think, Abby? How are you about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have nothing to compare it to, so it's quite hard for me to say. And also, when I have been doing larger pitches, I generally wasn't in the room for the males, so it was quite hard for me to specific. But I have obviously naturally been inquisitive, really, particularly in the time that we were in, 2 weeks into COVID. Your numbers and your runway and what that means and where that's going, super, super important at the time that I was going out. So yes, 100%. I do think that really having, and it has to be quite seamless as well. We also, have realize that you need to really be fluid around what that leads to, and it's not just around the number side, but the actual objective that you are going to land at the end of that investment period, so that you know what's going to trigger the next investment round if you're going on that journey or something else. So just being really clear on those objectives that you're setting yourself as well.
No, thanks. That's really, really helpful. And while I've got you, I thought I'll just move on to a kind of another thing that I thought was really helpful, given that where you got such a range of sources together for your investment. And by the way, I think we'd all say being aware as women pitching and all people pitching, you very rarely get all the money from one source. You generally have to get it from several sources. And so Abby is a prime example of that, having to put together what I always call a cocktail of funding to get what you want. So Abby, when you were pitching to angels and VCs, and I don't quite know how you did it, but did you find that it was different, that you had to prepare differently, that you were asked different questions, or shorter, longer pitches? I don't know. What were the differences for you?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think for me, the core decision that we had to make before we even approached VCs in particular was around, is that the type of money, the type of journey that our business should go on? So just for kind of context, a VC is looking for that next unicorn, that next $1 billion company. So you need to be ready to go on that journey, because they're going to want you to be one of them. And you have to make sure that in your conversations with VCs at every step, that your plans are reflective of that. And in all honesty, angels might not care too much about that. They're just happy for a good return. Some of them might just be really passionate about the vertical that you're in. And I think for me, that was a decision that we had to make. So that was always a starting point around, actually, that proposition that Emma was just talking about was really reflective of being able to suit that type of investor. And then I suppose the other part of it, and again, we might come on to this later, is around due diligence, being very early, that there isn't a lot of due diligence on either angels or VCs, but they will be really looking at you as your team in a lot of detail. And I think whilst both angels and VCs do that, I had a much more a kind of zoomed in focus, if you like, from VCs around exactly what are the CVs in your current pipeline, who's already on board, and how quickly are you going to be able to do that. And I found that was distinctively quite different to the angels that we have on board.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, because I think that is quite an important thing to be aware of. I mean, turning to you, Nicole, on that, obviously having been on both sides, both venture capital and angel, and I think we see you're kind of sitting in the middle, pulling all parts together at the moment, Nicole. I was just thinking that it'd be interesting to get your reflections on what you would be looking at as a VC and how you might differently approach that as an angel.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what I do with Back VC, we do a lot of due diligence, on a weekly basis, and it's a different level to what I generally see in my angel groups. I mean, angels, like Abby touched on, angels can have any number of reasons for investing. For example, I actually looked at a deal where I'm actually, if I invest in it as an angel, it will be like as a research project more than a fueling growth. And it's just because it's something I'm so passionate about. So I kind of say angels have the luxury of leniency in a way. They don't necessarily need the same returns to cover the management fees of a fund. Some of them don't need great returns. They just want the money returned back because they love angel investing. So if they get the same, they're happy with that. It completely depends on the angel. And some of them can be completely mission driven as well. And this is why they invest. They also don't need necessarily the same timeline to return a fund that a fund would need. So I think this means that angels can decide on their own level of due diligence. And I've also seen a huge range in terms of angel investors. Some that go really deep as VCs go in terms of the reference checks, checking the tech stack, the amount of experts they call on the side to make sure that, this all makes sense as a business. And I've seen other angels who literally have one conversation and sign a check and it's done. And that's just their own, depends on what they do. A lot of them have got a full-time job and don't necessarily have the time to go to that level. But yes, definitely on the VC side, they don't have that kind of luxury to be able to do that. You have to return the fund, you have to cover the management fees. You need to make sure, like Abby says, that this could potentially be your $1 billion. Every single investment that they make needs to be able to return the fund in, a very high level view of the VC fund. So yeah, I think that's what drives the due diligence process. And it's all about getting to know the investors before you approach them. Founders, I think, are very happy often to get on a phone and say, this is my experience with different VCs. There's even platforms like Landscape that you can go on and get honest reviews, which is quite scary for investors, but I think that's great for founders. And there's ways to do your due diligence on the investors before you speak to them to make sure that this is actually what you're wanting to do. This is the journey you're wanting to take.
No, that's very, very helpful indeed. And just one kind of supplementary on that. Do you feel that VCs will focus more on different elements of the pitch? For example, technology, the innovation, or is it the finances? Do you feel that there is more focus by VCs on certain aspects of the pitch than others? Whilst, I always think, for me, as an angel, it's the people are like absolutely fundamental. The team is so fundamental to me at that early stage. But I'm just thinking about from your own experience.
I think so. From my, limited experience of one person, I would say yes, absolutely. Most of the angels you speak to, I would say that about 80% of the angels I've asked are very team driven. That they say this: the founders will have to be able to pivot and find their way, because when you're looking at pre-seed or angel stage investing, there usually is nothing. There's often no product, maybe not even revenues. You're just believing that the team can figure it out as they go. However, for VCs, they often come in at one stage later. So hopefully there's a little bit of technology for them to look at, or the idea is developed further, a lot more research. And I do find that they do just that. What you said is focus a lot on the product, but not only product, the market as well. So I think angels often say, I love the idea, I love the team, I'm going in on this one. I'm not going on this journey with this founding team. Whereas the VCs need to say, this product, this technology, this innovation in this market at this time makes sense. And so I think that is, the slight difference. A lot of VCs I know that are early stage, they do spend a lot of time looking at the team. If they don't believe the team can deliver it, then absolutely, but the product needs to make sense, or else, they'll be building the wrong thing.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Emma, in your experience, and obviously you'll have been working with both the VCs and angels and especially in helping to prepare businesses who having different kinds of pitching experiences. What are your insights around that in terms of what VCs are looking for, angels, or any differences that you think should be thought about when pitching?
That's an interesting question, and I think Nicole's sort of highlighted some of the challenges of how you position yourself. I'm a member of a couple of angel groups, and I've observed the different approaches within that group towards investment. So I'd say they fall broadly into three camps. Those that they know there's a risk and they're investing in the team. those that love the technology and investing in the sector, and those that understand the numbers and want to see a robust business. So that's kind of my experience with those angels. So within that one angel group you're with, you're actually having to engage all three thinking working styles. So what I try to do when I'm preparing companies is to think about where their strengths are in their proposition relative to the stage they're at, understand where their weaknesses are, and then say what their plans are to address the weaknesses and what they're looking for the funding and finance. If they're seeking angel investment, also look at, well, asking the angels about what help they can give them, because most of the angels I work with are absolutely superstars in their particular areas, and they can give so much knowledge and information if you ask them and if you engage with them, and they really can be your real champions. And then the other thing I get people to think about when they're segueing through from angel to VC is that you've got to have a whole valuation, a realistic valuation, so that when you segue from a VC into a VC from an angel, that the valuations are right. So there's a whole expectation management that goes with it. So when you're pitching, it's being open to negotiation, understanding where the concerns are, valuing yourself appropriately, trying to get by comparison valuation rather than what's on the paper and how much money you've spent. So getting that element sort of open. So you have that informed negotiation, and then having the angels be a part of your pitch when you're preparing to segue into VCs about how am I going to position this? What are the good things? What are the things that we're willing to negotiate on? Which are the deal breakers for you as the angels? And then getting those previous investors, and even if it's follow-on investment VC, getting that support and advice into your pitch and into that structure, into your business plan and thinking, because ultimately they're your champions. They've invested in you, they love what you're doing, they want to see a return on the investment, they want to win. This is about all parties winning. And sometimes I meet people who come into the investment and they see it almost like an adversarial position, that is some kind of a competition, and I've got to get the best deal, and I've got to get the most amount of money, and I've got to get the highest valuation. And it isn't. You're investing in a relationship. So the other thing that I try to say is when you go about preparing for the pitch and think about the content, is you're investing in a relationship, and it's going to be a long relationship. You're going to be with these people for a very long time, sometimes more than significant others. So you need to really invest your time in preparation of, as Abby and Nicole have said, in building that relationship, understanding the drivers, and also positioning yourself and the culture, the values, the ethics of your organization, sharing those in your pitch and explaining to the investors, if you work with me, this is what it's going to be like. This is how I'm going to engage with you. This is how I'm going to treat you. And this is how I'd like to be treated. So I think that's the other element that I think is really, really important. It's all about relationships. And women, we're very good at articulating these values and actually being open. I think naturally we tend to be better negotiators in the way we approach things. So I think we've got a real trump card there. Why aren't we using it?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Emma. For me, one of the big ways that women do win out is actually being really personalizing their story and personalizing their pitch. I've found that it's incredibly useful to immediately build rapport. So yes, I do totally agree with that. And remembering for everyone who's seeking investment, it works two ways, because you're trying to engage with them and you're then wanting them to engage with you. So you can see the most of them as investors too, because this is a long-term relationship that you're going to have. And so, Emma, sort of moving on a little bit into this now, and we've talked about, really understanding, therefore, the nuances of your audience, of who you're pitching to, and the framework in which you're pitching. But now just thinking about what makes the essence of a good pitch. And I'm going to start with you, because I know you're doing this as your day job all the time. I mean, what would you say were the kind of big building blocks, therefore, of a good pitch?
Well, for me, and anyone who's been on my sessions that I've run, I always say it's the value proposition. Because if you know what the needs and issues are, then you've built a product, or you're building a product with the right features and the right benefits. You can evidence that. You can show what's unique and special about your approach, because you've understood what the problems are in the market and the fact that your competitors aren't addressing it. So I think once you've got that and you can really articulate the market that you're going into, and in that, it's not just about the market size, but it's how you're going to reach that market. So where you sit in the value chain, who are the people you're going to have to make friends with in order to reach your customers? Who are the beneficiaries, the end users? So if you can get that whole, that, I suppose it's really around explaining your commercialization to market route with validated numbers around that that product, that market. And early stage, you're talking about your beachhead market, so it doesn't have to be the biggest, it just has to be the one with the greatest need that you can prove yourself in there. Very early stage, the team is absolutely critical, because the investor really needs to feel confident that you've got the right people there. And I think having an advisory board around there, so that team slide, what the skills you bring in, who are your advisors, the people that you're looking for to join you as well, is really important. And finances is a little bit finger in the air. So I think 1 year's finances, 18 months, that runway, you can probably be quite sure. You should know what your monthly burn rate and that sort of information is. But I wouldn't worry so much at the earlier stage around that finance, because we know that model's going to change. You don't really know what it's going to look like. You don't know how customers are going to buy, what your sales cycles look like or anything. So I tell people not to work. Yes, you've got to have a good financial model, but I'd actually focus more on that to market. So then it's that traction. Who is it you're talking to? If you're not talking to them, when do you plan to talk to them? What milestones do you need to reach? So that then goes back to the technology slide, which is, don't tell me hours and hours what your problem is, what your technology is. Tell me how it solves a problem for that customer and what you've done to protect it as well. So then if IP is very important, then explain to what your IP strategy is, or how you're protecting it, because an investor wants to know that you've either got that first mover advantage and you need that money to move quickly and you can execute, or that you've got that protection, which means that somebody's going to pay that premium price for it. So those would be technology, value proposition, team, with a little sprinkle of finance and a lot of thinking around traction.
Thanks, Emma. No, those are really, really great building blocks. Nicole, turning to you, do you want to add any more into I'll call it the jigsaw puzzle, any more pieces? And then I thought it would be really useful to go on a little bit with you also, a little bit about sort of presentation and delivery, and how far in those early stages that is an important factor in the success of your pitch. But perhaps just moving on, starting with Emma's kind of core points there.
Yeah, so I think Emma, she's covered that in a lot of detail. I think about it maybe a little bit more high level when I speak to people, in terms of like the 3 T's, I like to say, just easy to remember: the team, the traction, the technology. And then of course, with technology does come all of the rest, like the IP that Emma mentioned, and the market and all of that. When you're looking at the technology, like whether that technology is being built at the right time in the right market. But yeah, I think in terms of presentation versus content, this is the tricky part about getting your metrics and your details all right, but still having that compelling story that just grabs you and makes the investor think, oh, I really have a relationship with this person. I think I can work with them for a long time. Because if the angel investors I know, they're very hands-on with their founders. They're always there if the founder needs anything. I speak to the founders I invest in very often as well. And so you need to have some kind of a relationship that you're not going to hit heads, and you just have a good working style together. So the only way that you can really tell that is when the founder's pitching, and it's a very intuitive sense. And I think women maybe invest more on intuition, which is fantastic, I think, for early stage. Sometimes, the early stage, we're able to build those relationships with founders very quickly in the pitch. So the delivery is so important for the angel investors. However, I really believe there's no point in having any storyline if there's no substance behind it. So as a founder, my advice is always, start with your substance. Go through all of those points that Emma just mentioned and make sure you've got each of those nailed down with metrics, with numbers, with details, with understanding it all, like to the deepest level that you can. And on top of that, then layer on the storyline and the storytelling on top of it. I think sometimes if we get an idea to go and pitch, we start thinking, how am I going to pitch? But actually, you need to start from the real base level. And then if your delivery is not great, you won't be able to draw them along with you. But I would start substance first, get all of those slides on your pitch deck ready, get your financial model built out. It won't be perfect, but after that, think how you can turn this into a compelling story.
Great tips. Thank you so much. No, really, really good. Abby, I'm going to turn to you now because you're the one who's been doing the pitching recently. And I thought it would be really good, having kind of listened to what Emma and Nicole have just been saying, to how you approached this. And when you were putting your pitch together, how you chose the components. And also, I'm really interested to know how far you felt, because I feel this is very important, that you felt you wanted to personalize this and make this related to your, to things you really knew, understood, and observed, and how you built your pitch to gain rapport and gain that attention.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And I think Emma and Nicole have touched on a lot of points. I think one thing that we did was really focus on taking that advice. If you're getting the same advice over and over again, that should be reflected in your story. So when you start your pitch deck and your story and your substance evolves all the time. You're getting new traction every week. You might have specific objections that are consistently coming through. So you might want to just handle those at the outset through putting just something else in your slide. So we really saw it as a live document that was constantly being updated, which really helped, I suppose, manage the process organically, but also around just being really visually quite clear. I think having the right amount of information on a slide. So if you're presenting it, less words, more visual. And if it's something that someone's going to review, having another version, making sure that it's super detailed to get the point across, because that's really important, I think, and actually probably more important than people might say. So the substance is great, but for example, if you're a B2B business like we are, if you're not able to put a good slide deck together, that's also reflective of how you might pitch to your potential clients. Equally, if you're a consumer business and you've got not very good socials, that's also going to play into that mindset of the investor of saying, is this how they present themselves to the people that they're trying to attract? So it's almost like pre-interview in that sense of going back to them having a look at making sure that team can deliver. And so whilst substance 100% start there, sadly equally the visuals actually are important, particularly at the earlier stage, definitely.
Yeah, I think this is really quite an interesting thing about the visuals. And I'm just going to now flip this, and I don't know how much you've done it online when you were doing your approach, because I know you were saying just a bit pre the lockdown and then during. But for me, I've seen a massive change in the way entrepreneurs have been pitching to us during lockdown, because honestly, the quality of the visuals has become very, very significant. And therefore, the more you see them, it's a bit of a drug. It's a bit like watching, doing a lot of games, or a lot of, seeing a lot of TV. You start to kind of do that. I need great visuals to convince me what you're doing. How far was this a big thing? Because I guess I also feel it's a challenge for entrepreneurs to produce great visuals. I mean, did you spend a lot of time on that? Did you get external help? I find this quite an interesting challenge, a new challenge, should I say, for the online world.
So I was quite scrappy with it. So I used Canva, which was it's great because it has loads of pre-populated templates, and then I just adjusted them to the story as I needed to. There are lots of people that you can pay on Fiverr, for example, that will give you a set of slides. In all honesty, it's kind of like getting a square peg in a round hole. You do better to actually try and just fit the slides to the story that you're trying to tell yourself as far as you can, and try and utilize some of these design tools that are a bit more click and drop, if that's not your forte like mine. I found that was a good way, so some of our investors we pitched during lockdown, and we've never actually met face to face. Others came on board when we'd previously met them beforehand, and I think visuals did play a really big role for us, particularly when you're trying to inspire about changing the world through sustainability. It has to be around it's related to our brand, if you like, and I think it really comes back to the type of product and proposition that you are pitching. But I think for us that was really important, so I definitely agree. And again, when we go back out, I 100% will be focusing on that again, just because it's worked really well for us before.
And I just want to ask you that final point that I began with, which is you have a very strong kind of personal background story as to why you're focusing on greenwashing and sustainable fashion. Did you find that you were able to tell that story sufficiently throughout? Because for me, consistency of the story that begins with a story and a need and a challenge is then very, very important. Did you find that you were able to maintain that and that became important to you?
Yes, yeah, that's also a great question. So what I did, so for context, so our product was born out of frustration that I had as a consumer, not being able to trust a lot of what brands say. So I embedded that into my story at the very beginning, but I also tied that to key data points. So for our last funding round, it was all around every second of textile waste is either dumped or burned. So you can actually put this problem and individual frustration and directly apply it to a macro environment issue that's happening. And then you go into how that particular problem that you are tackling, and that obviously at a pre-seed is really quite a nice way to tie the two together, as a way to get that story going, if that makes sense.
No, thank you very much. No, that was how I wanted to hear whether you did that, because I've found that again, and I'm coming back to the women's situation, but I do think women are incredibly good at that. And it's one of the things that always strikes me, and I'm sure my colleagues agree. So thank you, Abby, for that and for those great tips. I'm going to turn back to you, Nicole, now for a moment, because as we've said, the pitch is the starting point, and you've touched on it before as well, Nicole. The pitch is the starting point, and then really what happens next is really, an outcome of the pitch and the impression the investors had of you and what they're going to want to focus on next. Could you give to those who've obviously been less used to the process, just a sense of kind of you pitch and then what would normally you would expect to happen next?
Yep, definitely. So you're absolutely right. It's kind of the first step after a founder has pitched, and whether it went well or not, I think it's always a great idea or whether you feel it went well or not, because you don't really know what the investor's thinking. It's a great idea to just follow up. Obviously, if there were any documents that you offered to share, during the pitch, definitely send them over, especially for angel investors who have other full-time jobs. You don't want them to have to chase you for a financial model if you said you'd offer it, or a longer version of the pitch deck, or whatever it may be. So make sure that you follow up with that. If there were no documents to share, I would say still email them, just to keep them, yourself and your business front of mind. And I would always say connect with them on LinkedIn. They may not accept it, but I think because investors have such great investor bases on LinkedIn, you could potentially get access to a number of other people by doing this, and you're beginning to build a relationship. So I think if the investor is keen and you're taking it, you feel like it could be going to the next level, you can expect another follow-up call where you'll probably go into more of the metrics, more of the financials, and you need to have all those financials ready so they don't have to wait for you to put anything together. Have your full data room with any other information that investors may have hinted that they'd like to see. Have it all ready for the second call or before. But even if an investor, you think they may not be interested, I would still say that you have the opportunity to ask them if you can add them to your updates. So as an investor, information is really powerful to me. Maybe I might see a founder at their pre-seed stage, but decide I'm not going to invest at that point because maybe there are too many risks I can't wrap my head around, or I want to see how they deliver. If I'm on that founder's updates every month or quarter or however often you do it, I'm then able to go back when they raise their seed round and see how they progressed, what their biggest stumbling blocks were. I can look at what their asks were to the investors, which is usually, a portion of the update. And I'm able to just see the progression. So that would make it so much easier for me to then come in at the seed round. So even if an investor's not going in on this round, make sure that you're building that relationship in any way you can, because there's a good chance, that you can come back to them and circle back for the next round.
Thank you. That's really, really, really useful advice. And that whole preparation for the next phase, really useful. Emma, coming back to you, would you like to add any kind of points that, again, you've seen or you'd like to recommend around that? Because clearly, as we've said, the pitch is stage 1 or stage 2, having got even as far as a pitch. And then, you're then hoping to move to the next phase. What's your tips and advice on that?
That's very interesting, because I'm actually running a program now on helping some people get ready for their first Series A investment. And I would say, first of all, make sure that everything, particularly if you're segueing into a VC round, make sure everything adds up. So your public persona, what you say on LinkedIn, what your website says, all of that information is right. Because the first thing I'm going to look at is a one-page investment pitch or investment teaser or a slide deck. And I'm going to go and Google you. I'm going to look on the internet. I'm going to go and look at the databases I've got. I'm going to want to see what you've done. I'm going to want to see how if I've been tracking you, I want to see how your stories changed as you've developed your technology, you've reached certain proof points. So the first thing I say is think about the public persona, make sure that everything adds up, that your websites are up to date, etc. Then I would say is obviously get all of that collateral that an investor is going to be asking for ready, because you will have so many questions. So be preparing a pitch. I'll do dummy runs. I'd ask people to say, what do you see the weaknesses? Get them to get a list of the questions you might be asking, so you're prepared for that. So you can answer them in the Q&A, but you can also then back it up with evidence when people do due diligence on you. I would have start putting together a really nice data room. Make sure you've got all of the information that's going to be needed for that due diligence process. But what's that due diligence process going to look like? Well, ask the investor. If it's an angel investor, and if it's that person who loves the finances and numbers, and I sat through a due diligence with one of those, they literally went down on the financial model for a SaaS model, and they said, what's the cost to acquire a customer? How long do they need to stay on? What will the impact be if you don't meet that? And they literally went and played with that financial model. Others have said, look, we don't know what you're going to be in 18 months' time. You need to reach these technical milestones. So tell me about the team. Tell me about your technology and what the milestones are. So knowing what your business model is, what you're depending on, is be prepared for that. So have some scenarios handy that you can work with. Have all that evidence. As I said, if you've done your value proposition, you've got some traction, make sure your customers are ready to pick up the phone call and say to the investor, yes, this is true, or I've done that. The angel investors I know, as well as the VCs, will pick up and speak to customers. And this is really where I'm going into Nicole's territory. But as a VC, you'll be testing certain assumptions in the value proposition. So you'll have a list of what it is that you'd be looking for that particular investment. And how your investment committee works and what the biases are of that panel. So if you've got a really friendly investor who's working with you doing the due diligence, you want to make their life easy. Remember what I said about relationship? So ask them what it is they want. What do they know that their panel focuses on? And make sure you can provide that information in enough detail that will give them no reason to say no. So that's kind of my advice.
No, thank you, Emma. Really, really useful. Because it's really worth thinking about the two things together. Don't be surprised by the what next. Don't be surprised by the need to be ready. And so getting all that information in a data room. Also, I think it does help you, doesn't it, when you're actually having, you may have a lot of grilling questions immediately following the pitch from the investors. And actually it's the same kind of thing, because you have to bear in mind what people are doing are their initial due diligence at that point, and then getting ready for their more detailed reviews. So yeah, absolutely. And that can vary about, there's a lot of pitching been going on in the last year where people have just been doing straight online pitching, no questions from investors because it's been too complex online, and then others have been a lot of Q&A. So your points are very, very well made. It's very similar situation, and just because we're sort of don't want to run too much over time, I thought it'd be really useful just to sweep round all three of you, because we've had some great, really great points raised today. And I hope that everyone who's been listening has started to kind of see, in a way, there's a bit of a pattern to this information. And there's, it's been understanding how to build that up and build it into a great pitch, and the things you need to think about. But also, I'd just like to turn to each of you now and just ask you for kind of one kind of key piece of advice that you feel would be really useful to give the women innovators who are watching this today. And I'm going to start with you, Abby, because, as I said, you've been through the process, you know what it's like, you're close to it right now, and you've been seeing it very much from the entrepreneur's perspective. So, Abby, have you got any kind of piece of advice you'd give to your fellow women innovators today?
Yeah, I think I actually have two pieces that relate. So the first one is around really build your own CRM. So whatever is an Excel or something, just be super, super diligent of how you manage the process of which that you would like to talk to investors. This will help you quickly decipher who's best for you and the right fit. And then equally, going back to Nicole's point on updates, just making sure that you're sending the right information at the right time. And if you are actively raising, showing literally the traction as it speaks on the ground, so that it takes a lot more work because you have a lot more plates to spin whilst also building traction. But it really does help investors understand where you're going and at what pace. So those would be my two things.
Great. No, very, very useful. Thanks very much. Over to you, Nicole. Any final parting advice you'd like to give?
Yeah, one of the things we do at C in the mentorship we give female founders is, I hate the word, but we say create a hit list, and it's your hit list of investors. It's your ideal investors, basically. And I think this is really important so that you can know that how you're going to go out there should be driven by who you want to invest in your business, instead of just a spray and pray approach. So I'd say create that list of ideal investors. And then the next thing is to get support in doing it. So, this fundraising business, even though all founders have to do so much of it, is not necessarily always something that comes naturally to you. There are advisors that come on board your businesses, reach out to them. There are the founder communities, take advantage of them, reach out to founders who have done it before. There are investors who are very happy to, hop on a call and give you just feedback. And as Abby said, sometimes creating your storytelling or your storyline or getting ready to pitch, it starts with just getting out there and asking for advice. So get the support you need to do it.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. Very, 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 very useful tip there. Thank you. And over to you, Emma, in terms of a parting piece of advice or something that you really feel is key.
So a while ago, but I've been on both sides. And the one thing that I'd wish I'd sort of known was just how much preparation you really need to have done, and being really honest about what your needs are. And understanding, can I actually break up the investment into tranches? What are the milestones? What is it that I'm going to be doing? And being really, really honest with yourself around your business and that capability. and then preparing absolutely everything that you need to defend and back up. And it might be a reflection as well that I have a PhD, so I've always used to, I'm expecting people to question me, and not getting, when that happens, don't take it personally. It is absolutely not a personal decision. If you've done everything right, you've engaged properly, is don't let that knock you down and take your confidence away. There are lots of reasons why investors don't invest. Some people might be just doing it because they want to learn about the market. They're learning about the model and the business. VCs can do that. They can be just that they're really interested, but actually it's not the right time for them, or it's not a good fit in their portfolio when they've actually looked at it. It could be that somebody else in the in the investment community that they're supporting doesn't like it. So not to take it personally. It was very, very hard when it's your baby and you're so passionate about it that somebody knocks you down and says it's not right, or it's wrong. And if it is, then go and fix that problem and go pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and do it again. So that would be, I suppose, my 2 little bits of advice.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I know, really fantastic tips and advice from my fellow panelists. I mean, a lot, obviously we've covered things today. It's about, it's totally thinking about selling. Can you sell this? Can you sell yourself? Can you sell your business? Can you sell your innovation? We've talked a lot about confidence today, and we do want to obviously emphasize that, because, it's absolutely about having the confidence to stand up and really put forward put over a great business. We've talked about preparation, and I think that's been on everybody's lips as well. And Abby obviously typified what she'd been doing as well. So really preparing. I think being personal and personalizing it has also come over very strongly today, and being able to tell a clear story. And also making sure you've got those really strong building blocks in place, as referenced, in terms of your value proposition and your team, and your numbers, and your ability to scale. And then finally, and obviously being very aware that this is the door to the next stage of investing, and that you need to be ready to move on from there. And so I think that, I hope that everyone who's been listening today will feel that they've understood a little bit better about how to approach their pitch, and some of the key areas to think about. I think what we would all say is, in the end, it is all about you. It's all about your, being able to put over your great business and your great innovation and your ideas. And really being very much confident that you are the right person for these investors. And most importantly, I think we've all said today, make sure those investors are the right ones for you as well. So with that, I'm going to thank my fantastic panelists. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for all your great tips and insights and perspectives today. And I'm going to hand back to Siobhan, who's going to close this all down.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you for hosting today's webinar, and also to our fantastic panelists. We've spoken to Nicole, Abby and Emma today, who've all shared their thoughts and experiences with us, as well as Jenny's, obviously. And I'd also like to thank everyone who has joined us online today. Our next Let's Talk About webinar is taking place on the 14th of April. In the chat box, you should be able to see a link to register to the next one if you're interested in joining us. We'll be talking about taking it to the next level. So we do hope that you can join us then. If you'd like to keep up to date with all the Women in Innovation news and events, please do sign up to our newsletter or visit our program page or join the LinkedIn group. If you joined us on International Women's Day, you may have heard as well that we just announced that we will be opening up another Women in Innovation competition later this year. My advice to you is sign up to that newsletter. You will be the first to hear about when that competition opens and all of the support that's available for you to apply for that. So once again, I'd like to express a massive thank you to Jenny Tooth for hosting the wonderful session today, our panelists, and to you all for joining us. I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye, everyone.